So, I did go out of town for a few days last week. So I'm back into my quick responses to this 12 insane things that the Mormons actually believe. It is so ridiculously hot this last week. I have been trying to do these films with my air conditioner turned off so that the noise isn't in the background, but it is just too hot to turn it off today. So I apologize for the background. But this is number 5, so let us listen to this.
Number 5 thing that Mormons believe, they believe in baptizing for the dead. Have you ever noticed that like Mormons are like real big into like genealogy and stuff like that? Yeah, there's a reason why, because they want to try to get a record for every person who ever lived and then go get baptized in that person's place. And so therefore, like somebody who lived off in the 1500s in France somewhere who lived to be 30 and died, because of the bubonic plague or whatever, and was not a Mormon, they can actually go trace his genealogy, go find his name, and then go back to Salt Lake City and be baptized in the name of that person and wash away his sins, kind of like posthumously, like he can, he could like not have been, has his sins cleansed, and now you in Salt Lake in 2012 could have gotten baptized, and now all of a sudden he's in heaven, because that's what they believe. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what they say.
So there's that. Most of what he says is fairly accurate, but let us talk about salvation for the dead. So, yes, it is true we believe in salvation for the dead, and there's a very simple reason. We believe, as the Bible states, that one must be baptized to be saved. Christ himself, he states, one must be born of water and of the Spirit. This is baptism and confirmation. He says at the end, Mark chapter 16, verse 16, those who believe and are baptized shall be saved. So, yes, we believe that baptism is essential. But if somebody lived, and he talks about somebody in France in the 1500s, which is true, because in the 1500s they didn't have proper authority, but that'll come up in a different video anyway. But it's anybody who lived at a time or place where they did not have access to the proper priesthood authority for the ordinances of the gospel to be performed for them in this life. So, on their behalf, we perform the ordinances of the gospel to allow them that opportunity. If baptism is required for salvation, then God must provide a just God must provide a means for everybody to be baptized. And if they didn't have the opportunity in this life, there has to be an opportunity provided after this life. It's a logical conclusion. So yes, there are, and it's not just baptism. All the ordinances of the gospel, except priesthood ordination, are performed on behalf of the dead. Baptism, confirmation, and the temple ordinances are all performed for the dead, on behalf of the dead. Now, this idea of vicarious ordinance work is not new. It's all through the Bible. The very idea of the atonement of Christ is a vicarious work. Christ died in our place. So the principle of vicarious work is embedded in the very central tenets of the gospel. Anybody who believes in the atonement of Christ must believe in vicarious work. We just say that vicarious work, that principle of vicarious work, can be done on behalf of the dead by us in mortality. We do not take the place of Christ, because without Christ, no ordinance will ever do anything. Christ is the power source that makes all things effective. But everybody still must be baptized, and so we, baptize and receive all the ordinances. So we do these ordinances for the dead. Now that's the basic idea of the doctrine, and why we believe in it, what the reasoning behind the doctrine is. But let's look at a few passages of the Bible itself. See, we have this right here. This is in 1 Peter chapter 3. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. And that there is a description of vicarious work. The just being Christ, suffering for or in behalf of the unjust, which is us. And then verse 19, by which he also went and preached unto the spirits in prison, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. So Christ preached to the spirits in prison. And among these spirits were those who died in the flood at the time of Noah. Why is Christ preaching to the spirits? We know he preached to the living in his mortal ministry, and his apostles continued to preach to the living. But Peter is telling us here that he did not just preach to the living, he preached to the spirits, to those who are dead. And he says again here, 1 Peter, this time chapter 4, verse 6, for this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. So here we're told why Christ is preaching to the dead. Christ went and he preached to the spirits in prison. Why? So that they could receive the same judgment that the living receive. That those who receive the gospel in this life receive the same judgment as those who receive the gospel in the next. As like I said, as the practice, as the logic of the doctrine shows, you need baptism, whether you get it in this life or the next. And that's what this is saying. Christ preached to those spirits, those people who were dead, so that they would have the same opportunity as those who received the preaching of the gospel in this life. In addition, this is where it really brings it home in the Bible. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is Paul's great discourse on the resurrection. And I've mentioned this in a previous video. He's talking to the Corinthians, because the Corinthians were denying the resurrection. And he's talking to them, saying, if we don't believe in the resurrection, what's the point in our faith? And then he states, else what shall they do which are baptized for the dead? If the dead rise not at all, why are they then baptized for the dead? Now, I've had some people try to tell me that this was Paul referencing some pagan practices. But it makes no sense. Why would Paul use false doctrine to try and prove true doctrine? The idea that Paul would say, well, you should believe in the resurrection because these evil pagans are practicing baptism for the dead, is illogical. The only reason he would mention this is if the saints were practicing this. In other words, when Paul was still alive, and thus Peter was still alive, most likely, in that early period, in the apostolic period of the church, the saints practiced baptism for the dead. It states this in the Bible. And we do it, as Paul says, because we believe in the resurrection. We believe that there is something more to come. And only by receiving certain ordinances can we attain to the greatest reward to come. And therefore, we practice baptism for the dead. We do all the ordinances for the dead so that they have that same opportunity. And now, I do want to mention this. This is a little bit more into salvation for the dead, going beyond baptism to all the other ordinances. This is in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 40. He says here, talking about all the prophets, that all the trials they went through, that they were sawn asunder, tempted, slain, wandered in the desert. And then he says, and these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. See, we don't just do genealogy, as he says, to get the salvation for the dead, to give the dead the opportunity. That's a big part of it. But as it says here, they without us should not be made perfect. And this isn't talking about those who didn't receive the ordinances. This is talking about the prophets. because we believe that unless all the faithful are sealed together through the sealing power of the priesthood, that we are bound in a chain from Adam to the very end, that if one link of that chain is missing, the entire human family is condemned. We must be sealed. They, without us, should not be made perfect. And by token, we, without them, cannot be made perfect. We must, all the human family, must be joined by the power of the priesthood, or there is no salvation. That is why we study our genealogy. That is why we do these ordinances for the dead. Because unless they are sealed to us, it's not just them. We're not just doing this it's largely for them. We are doing it so they have that opportunity. But if we do not give them that opportunity, then we ourselves cannot be saved, because we cannot be saved without them, and they cannot be saved without us. That is what the Bible teaches us. That is what we believe. Now, you can think that's crazy, but it is straight from the Bible. Anyways, I'm going to leave that here. Thank you for watching. If you are enjoying it, like, subscribe, and tune in for the next one.